stuff. So
yeah, and we've brought on help, and last week we made it official where we have left the jobs that we were at.
Oh, congrats.
And even bringing on, yeah, thank you. So now we're 100% fully in the business, and because we left our other jobs and we've hired people, brought people on, we're still just maxed out. It's crazy.
That's awesome. Those are good problems to have, right?
Yeah, it's a very good problems to have.
Yeah. So did you guys, are they like interns, or are they actually like they're hired people who are doing shit for you guys?
Yeah, they're hired contractors, as well as we also got an intern. So I went to Penn State for undergrad, and now what will be nice is we're going to have a revolving internship with them, where we're going to pick someone up anywhere from like 180 to 240 hours a semester.
And they get credits for it and everything.
Yeah, they get credits for it and everything, and then we get a ton of help.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome.
How'd you go through that? I've always tried to reach out. I'm probably right. Did you have some connections, or did you just knew the right people?
Yeah, I've always kept in touch with the internship coordinator there at Penn State, as well as I was basically her assistant one semester, and I always kept close with her. She was awesome. She was pretty monumental for me during undergrad, and I've always kept in touch with her. And then she just happened to reach out a few weeks ago because a lot of students, they lost their internships, because of everything that happened. This one girl had a physical therapy technician internship lined up, and it just fell through because of the pandemic. So she was like, wait, why don't I just reach out to Craig, because this girl can learn a ton about physical therapy and do stuff remotely. So what's awesome is we were able to find and create a position for her, and she's going to get even a better experience, in our opinion.
Of course, that's awesome, man. Well, I know you're busy, so I appreciate you taking your time today. I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit about some running. We've had a couple clients, myself included, who I think, as I've talked to Ross a little bit more, I think it'd be great to have like little 15, 20-minute segments for the online internship that we have, and just talk about some common injuries that our clients are seeing and some ways to help them. And so what are some, I know it's kind of a broad question, but what are some common running injuries that you see? And is there anything as a trainer that we can do to be proactive and maybe implement some PreHab stuff for clients that begin a running program? Because I don't think a lot of people think like that, where, they're going to get out of quarantine or whatever, and they want to start getting in better shape. So they're just going to start putting on 10, 15 miles a week. And that's a lot of stress on the body. So is there some things that we could be preemptive about, and with the common injuries that the clients may come across?
Yeah, I would say that probably the most common things that a trainer is going to hear about and they're going to see is their clients complaining about soreness in their knees, their calves, maybe even their hips and their low back, depending on if we're talking about just flat running or if we're going into trail running or, even sprinting, you name it. You may run into some foot issues, especially if trainers are working with clients where, like you mentioned, they're really starting to ramp up running, or they're getting into it because now that is a form of training that is easy access while gyms are closed. Those things are going to start popping up, and then it's like, okay, as a trainer, sort of what do I do? How can I help? And I think the biggest thing is just sitting down with your client and reviewing, okay, when did you start running? When did you start dealing with these issues? And more importantly, what are the trends? What else are you doing? I think that's why it's so important for trainers when they work with their clients to have a really good journal of everything that they do. Personally, myself, even when I train or when I work with clients or patients, I advocate for them to document everything that they do. Not necessarily in terms of you have to do it so that you can keep making progressions, because sometimes that can be hard for the average person to really do, or if the trainer is working with them. But just as valuable as it is for creating sessions for the future and working towards a goal, documenting everything is really beneficial so that you can reflect back on what you've been doing when you run into an issue. No pun intended there. I said the word run into an issue, right? So with that being said, it's like, hey, okay, you're dealing with this knee issue. Let's take a step back and review what have you been doing the last 2 weeks? Because I know that you've been doing these workouts, and I know that you mentioned that you've been ramping up running, but what was your mileage 2 weeks ago? What was your mileage a week before that? What was your mileage this past week? Have you been running the same route? Have you started doing sprints? Have you started doing uphill or downhill? Are you running on the same side of the street where it's crowned? It's just trying to nitpick all these small little things that, oh, hey, maybe that's having an influence. Or did you just simply do way too much too soon? You know, we've all been there as trainers where you just completely demolish a client. You brought them on, you got them signed up for sessions, and they want to get in shape. They want to get ready for the summer or for a certain goal. And next thing you know, they went from working out 0 days a week to try and be active and do something 5 days a week. Running is no different than training when it comes to doing too much too soon. So I think as a trainer, that's where you can really sit down and educate your client, and you can go through that process, and you can try to identify, hey, maybe that's where you went wrong. And that's just from the education piece. That's the education standpoint right there. And then from a training perspective, if they're dealing with knee issues, well, it's so easy for clinicians and even trainers to hyper focus on a certain area. Someone says that they're dealing with a knee issue. All right, let's look right at your knee. But remember, the knee is stuck between the hip and the ankle. So if there's an issue at the hip, if there's an issue at the ankle, the knee ends up getting the shit end of the stick most of the times. So that's where it's like, okay, let's look at your hip. Let's look at your ankle. From an exercise standpoint, what's your balance look like? What's your single leg balance look like? From a hip standpoint, what does your hip stability look like? How's your strength? Running is a single leg sport. You know, that's the difference between running and walking, is that walking, you always have 2 feet in contact with the ground for most of the part. Like 60% of the time that you're walking, 2 feet are on the ground. However, with running, you're constantly 1 foot on the ground 100% of the time. So you want to look at single leg strength. You want to look at single leg stance, stability, so single leg balance. And those things are really important as a trainer. If you're working with a runner, you want to include single leg exercises. You want to do closed chain single leg exercises. You want to challenge balance. You want to challenge stability. And more importantly, you want to challenge more than just the sagittal plane. Running is typically a very linear focused exercise, but you need to consider that all the forces that are acting on the body are going to be in the frontal plane and the transverse plane. So, okay, how can I incorporate exercises that are linear focused in the sagittal plane, but at the same time, I am setting up an environment to isometrically work against anti-rotation, anti-lateral flexion, because those are going to be the forces that are imposed on the body during running.
Today in class was, I introduced them to the Journal of Strength and Conditioning. We started reading some of the journals, and it's so easy for people to take out of context. And so I wanted to have you elaborate a little bit on what you said with stability, because I think there's a lot of trainers that hear that, and all of a sudden they're gonna make an hour program with their clients juggling pins on a Bosu ball and doing a bunch of device work on an Eric's pad or a Dynadisc. So when you talk about stability, is there something you're specifically making reference to?
Yeah, really good point. You know, and we've all been there as trainers. I think that's why the position that you're in, the position that I'm in, we're trying to limit trainers from making this potentially the same mistakes that we have, because I've totally put people on Bosu trainers. I've totally have made clients do circus acts. But the reality is, when we're talking about running and we're talking about single limb stance stability, we want to see how well can a person balance on one foot and maintain optimal positioning and alignment that they need to maintain while running. Because running, you're working into a low to moderate impact exercise. And when you run, in order to be efficient with running, you want to be, your body, you want to feel like a spring. You want to be a stiff spring. There's 2 types of people that you watch when they run. The one person where the ground is influencing how their body is positioned versus the person that is in control of their position, and they are imposing forces on the ground that they're in control of. So what I mean by that is someone just running and they're sloppy, where they go to jog and stride with the right leg and basically their entire body deforms based on their stride? Or is that person taking a stride with the right and staying strong and rigid throughout their body, maintaining that single limb stance stability, and then imposing forces in the ground that are going to traject them forward? So with that being said, yes, we can regress down to the basics, where let's work on single leg balance, but let's include some of that stuff that I mentioned earlier. Like, one of my favorite go-tos for a runner is just a step up or a step down, or like an RDL with a pal-off press with single leg balance. And I'm not getting them on a foam pad. If I want someone to mimic foam pad, just have them work out in their running shoes. Most running shoes are going to have some foam and cushion to them. But we have to understand that running, depending on what body area and what muscles we're talking about, can impose anywhere from 2 to 3, even up to 7 times your body weight. So putting your client on a Bosu ball and working on single leg stability, that may not be the most beneficial thing versus making them do single leg exercises and loading up the movement, making their body work against 2-3 times their body weight forces so that they can tolerate the demands of running. Because ultimately, 85 to 90% of running injuries are due to training error, or the body just not being prepped for the demands of running. One of our professors at USC said it best: you don't get fit, you don't run to get fit, you have to be fit to run. And that's why it is so important as a trainer working with a client, understanding what are the demands of running and how do I best prep my client for those demands.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I love you guys because you're so politically correct. Essentially, the breakdown there was NASM sucked. But no, I'm just joking. No, but I think that's so true, where we were talking in class today about a few years ago, Michelle Obama, she got all this publicity for being like the most influential woman when it came to fitness, because she made the suggestion for kids just to need to move more. And I kind of talk about that. It's good intent. Like, yeah, that's great. Yay. But at the same time, if you have a kid who's overweight to obese and you just throw out and you have them start running, it's like a boat that's sinking. You tell them to go faster. It's like, I love that. I'm going to use that quote now because that's so true. It's like, you need to be fit and strong, because you're getting as much as 7 times the amount of force production on your ankle and your knee. I mean, there's a lot of shit that can go wrong. Now, with that being said, there's some prerequisites that you look for if you want to get real nerdy. Like when you look at ankle dorsiflexion, like a minimum of 15, 20 degrees, or are there any tests that you like to screen people if they're just real adamant that, they have an extra 20, 30 pounds and they're like, no, I love running, I want to get out there. Are there maybe some screens or something that you guys implement that would be helpful and maybe even prevent any type of injuries at the ankle or knee?
Yeah, I think for the trainer, you don't have to dive down too much into the nitty-gritty for range of motion. There are some things that we'll look at as clinicians where we're going to look at big toe mobility. If someone is presenting with some weird stuff and things aren't adding up. But as a trainer, I would simply start with just look at strength and stability stuff. I mean, let's dive into what are the demands of running, right? And we mentioned single leg strength, single limb stance stability, so just single leg balance. But then more importantly, from an energy standpoint, what is the demands of running? And we're talking about muscle endurance as well as cardiorespiratory fitness. So with that being said, it's okay. I should definitely look at single leg strength tests, and I should look at the ankle. I should look at the knee. I should look at the hip. I should look at the core, the trunk stability, because we know that trunk position will definitely influence the alignment below the trunk. So if I'm getting blown around by a strong gust of wind because I can't control my trunk, I'm going to be setting up my legs for just bad positioning that with repeated stress, when you run, you contact the ground over thousands of times. So trunk control is really important. So you can get very creative. You can do any type of single leg heel raise that you find beneficial. You can look at single leg squats. You can just look at like a hip hinge form, like an RDL. You can do single leg bridge stuff. You can, and then again, make it where we're not talking about brute strength, right? We're just looking at muscle endurance with some of those tests. And then plank variations, full planks, side planks. You can get as creative as you want. Range of motion standpoint, what's nice is we don't need the extreme ranges of motion with running. You look at the average person run, we're talking about maybe 30 to 50, if not 60 degrees of knee flexion. The ankle, we're not getting into too crazy ranges of ankle dorsiflexion like we need to with squatting. The hip, not getting into too much crazy ranges of hip flexion or extension. We definitely want good hip extension, because if we don't have good hip extension, then we're bound to rotate. Then we may do something that's called like a crossover with our step where we look like we're scissoring. So just having good hip flexor length, having good hip flexion strength, that's where a lot of runners go wrong, especially if people dive into doing stairs, doing uphill running. It is very demanding on your hip flexors. So doing a lot of good hip flexion strengthening is going to be really important for runners.
Love that. So we got the foundation taken care of. We got to start getting strong unilaterally and doing some stability and strengthening of the core and the hips and the ankles. What about you have the client who now they do get a little slight injury. We hear a lot of the terminology, is it right, is it wrong, but like, let's say runner's knee. What exactly is that? And what are some things that we can do if a client, obviously we're not diagnosing, but if a client were to give themselves that label of, I have runner's knee, what would be some things that we could help them with?
Yeah, so I think as a trainer, where you can really shine when helping out your client that's dealing with pain or discomfort, it's encouraging them with what they still can do. Because, right, a big thing as being a trainer is you want to keep that person working with you, and you want to make sure that they feel like they're still getting value and that they can still do things, even though that maybe they're not able to do what they were just doing. So then it's like, okay, how do we modify if someone is dealing with with runner's knee, right? They've been told that they have runner's knee, or hey, I'm just having knee pain with a lot of different things. Well, number one is just modify activities, right? Like, okay, are you only dealing with that on impact? Hey, let's just mix up your workout routine for the time being. Let's do only low impact cardio. Let's try elliptical. Okay, is elliptical not going well? Let's get you on a stationary bike. Let's get you on a rower. Let's get you on anything that you have access to that's going to be low impact if you enjoy doing cardiovascular fitness stuff. And then from a runner's knee standpoint, again, the knee stuck in between that ankle and the hip. So maybe we need to take a look at hip abductor strength. Is the person getting in the bad positioning alignment with running? What's typically not something that you always learn, that is not spoken about too much with runner's knee, because runner's knee is typically going to be referred to as stuff in the front of the knee. Depends on who you're talking to. Like, we want to make sure that we're delineating between runner's knee, or we're dealing with like patellofemoral pain, kneecap stuff, versus IT band syndrome stuff. But either one, what we need to do is, for the time being, we need to offload the knee because things are hot and bothered. So then with those clients, do a lot of hip focus stuff where you're loading the hip, you're offloading that knee for the time being. And then that's where you can refer to someone, rehab, if you want to bounce ideas, or if they can't train at all with you, then it's like, okay, maybe I just need to pass off. Or once they can start working back in with you, start slowly reloading that knee. Because ultimately, there was some sort of training error, right? It's like the knee was asked to do too much too soon, but the person wants to get back to running. So their capacity was here, the demand was here. We need to get their capacity here. And let's strengthen the hip. Let's strengthen the knee when it's ready for it. Flexibility, right? You can be showing this person how to be doing a ton of soft tissue stuff on their own. You can be making sure that they're keeping their quads flexible. We want to talk about positions that may be aggravating it. So they call it like the moviegoer sign. If you're constantly sitting with your feet on the ground, knees are like flexed to a 90-degree position. There's certain angles of knee flexion that are going to put more compression on that kneecap joint. So we want to get the knee in a position where it's not dealing with so much compression, which tends to be the knee tolerates being in a straighter position. If you've ever dealt with knee pain, you sit for a while and then you go to stand up, it feels miserable, right? It's achy, there's a lot of pressure. So it's like, hey, for the time being, when you're sitting at your desk or you're in the car, try to keep your knees straight. Those are some things off the top of my head. Did I miss anything?
Oh, that's awesome. I just got one more for you, and I always have at least one selfish question. It's always about me. So about 3 weeks ago, I started running, and I think maybe, I don't know what it was, but I'm self-diagnosing myself, some right hamstring strain, and it hasn't seemed to go away. And when I sprint, it definitely irritates it a lot more. And so then when I run, it's not as bad. What would be some suggestions for someone who would have a slight, if we want to call it a strain of a hammy muscle? Are there some things that you would suggest?
I strained my hamstring it'll be 3 weeks ago on Saturday when I was trying to warm up for sprints, and it sucked. Are you doing with high hamstring, closer to like your butt, or behind
right
your
where
knee?
the ischial tuberosity is, right there. It's like, right, fucking sucks.
And then when do you feel it while running?
So
what phase?
So it's going to be the longer strides. So I can, and I'm a meathead, so I just push through it, but I'll do sprints because I like them. I fucking hate running because I think it's just weak. And so, but I've just been doing like little jiggle jogs, and it's okay. But when I love sprinting. And so I don't know if it's going to be, it's fun to throw ideas out there. And I love talking to you guys because maybe it's glute weakness, maybe it's adductor weakness. And so that's why I like getting different ideas to kind of play around with myself and fix me up.
Yeah, high hamstrings are a pain. So I dealt with distal hamstrings. So how you deal with a distal hamstring strain is going to be very different than how you deal with a high hamstring strain. And that's because with a high hamstring strain, where it attaches on that ischial tuberosity, there's two things that happen with tendon issues. You're going to deal with a tension issue and you deal with a compression issue. With high hamstrings, you're going to put a lot of tension and even more compression on that area when the knee is more extended and you're in a lot of hip flexion. So for the time being, what you have to be wary of and you have to gradually work towards is where you're doing really hip dominant, big hip hinge motions, especially where you're loading it eccentrically. Like think of a slow deadlift or like a RDL or a band pull through. When you're really loading up your posterior chain, what you may want to do for the time being is limit how much of a hip hinge and how much hip dominant stuff that you're doing, because it just sort of has to cool off. But you can definitely do isometrics, and like that's what I did. So find an angle that you can tolerate. And what I'm talking about there is you're just getting into that hip hinge position, but how much of a hinge can you tolerate? And just holding a weight there, just doing a little bit of a weight lift off. And maybe you have your trunk more upright, you're squatting a little bit more versus a pure hip hinge. And then you just need to work your hamstrings. So high hamstrings are tricky, they take longer. And when you really work it, it's bound to get sore, especially for 24 to 48 hours. But work with the isometrics, do as much as you can, keep it moving. You want to do something like a hamstring extender where basically you lay flat on your back, you have your knee above your hip, and you're here, and then you're kicking your leg straight. Let me turn this and rotate this. And we can even send you a video about where you're like kicking your leg straight. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Let me show. And then you're going through your hamstring length, but you're doing it actively versus passively stretching that. With any sort of soft tissue issue, you want to avoid passive stretching, because that's only going to add more compression on that area that is the issue. So what you want to do is you want to get reciprocal inhibition of that hamstring by activating the antagonist. So laying on your back, having your knee above your hip and flexing your quad to straighten your leg, like doing an active 90-90 position, and doing that a couple days, a couple times a day. Again, listen to your hamstring. What's interesting is a study came out not too long ago, and they looked at hamstring strains. And they basically looked at return to sport time as well as rate of re-injury. And what they found was for the people that worked into pain, as well as for the people that didn't work into pain, the rate of re-injury was about the same, as well as the rate for return to time was about the same. However, there was a larger pronation angle, as well as greater strength gains in the people that worked into pain. So it's tricky as a trainer, especially if you're working with clients that really want to work with you and they're trying to get back to something, but they're dealing with discomfort, and you're on that edge of, well, what do I do? Like, you know, should I be encouraging this? It's a fine line to walk, but ultimately, like, that's where having someone to work with that you feel comfortable with, that's like a rehab specialist, and that they can give you advice, that stuff is great, especially if that person just really wants to keep working with you. But always remember that with running, you know, for you, I'm not concerned because you're a guy, you weight lift, you have a strong, big build. But for a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old that comes into the clinic, oh, sorry, I just hit the wrong, lose me there?
Yep, they're good.
I'm back. So for like a female teenager to come into the clinic and say, hey, I'm dealing with this pain at the top of my hamstring, it feels like I'm dealing with a hamstring strain. You got to be careful because it's so common for adolescent females to be dealing with like bone stress injuries. And that's where things can get tricky with runners and trainers, because the last thing that you want to do is skip the fact that someone may be dealing with a bone stress injury, because even if they got an x-ray, you know, there's so many runners out there that deal with issues, and there's certain areas that we can qualify as a low versus moderate versus high risk bone stress injury area. And if someone is a moderate or high risk bone stress injury area, that is something that you don't want to flirt with and you don't want to push into, because that person can even get an x-ray and it'll look super clean on an x-ray. And they'll be like, oh, I'm good. I got an x-ray. The doc said I'm fine. And then next thing you know, they run themselves right into a stress fracture. Because the bone stress injury is only going to show up on an MRI. That's the gold standard for seeing them. They're not going to show up on an x-ray. So if it looks funny, if it smells funny and you're concerned, just refer out, because you're going to thank yourself and the person's going to thank you, because coming back from a bone stress injury is a real bitch to deal with. So that's why you just got to know, what areas are okay to flirt with, and try to walk the right side of the edge, versus other scenarios that this looks funny, this smells funny, maybe I need to get a second opinion.
Yep, that's when in doubt, refer out. That's great. That's really good stuff. So I think what happened with me is I'm too much of a meathead. I went right into Nordics pretty quickly right after. And that's probably a little too much. And then they were literally sore for like a week. And I'm like, shit, they're not getting better. So I just need to do some of those more active ones. So I appreciate that. That's great stuff.
Load it up isometrically. Reach out to us if you have concerns, because some things just take time. And high hamstring, it's going to take probably twice the amount of time of your average distal hamstring. So expect 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks for it to feel really good. But it's just the progressions, right? It's loaded as much as it can tolerate, give it time off when it needs, keep it mobile. And that's where we talked about those hamstring extenders. And then respect the tissue, but load the tissue. And it's just micro dosing. You can do a little bit every single day. You don't have to thrash your hamstrings for rehab. But if you do a little bit every single day, you're going to stimulate that tissue to heal. You're going to limit atrophy as well as catabolic pathways or scar tissue pathways, and you're going to promote anabolic pathways. You're going to maintain good range of motion, and then you're going to get back to what you need to do. And then if we're going to continue talking about the running route, it's okay. Let me just start with some interval running, and let me keep the pace low. Maybe even start with power walking, where my body feels warmed up and I can start taking bigger strides and see how my hamstring feels. And then doing interval runs, interval jogs. And then, okay, let me do some interval sprinting where I'm getting into bigger strides and see how it feels. But again, it all goes back to what we started the conversation with. You can't manage what you don't measure. So you have to just keep track of what you're doing. What days did you do stuff? What was the volume? And if it's not getting better, then okay, I need to reflect on what I did, and I need to go back to where I was having success.
Awesome, man. I appreciate your time today. This is very valuable stuff, and I'm looking forward to the ones in the future. So thank you guys.
For sure.
Enjoy the rest of your night, and